What if the most beautiful day of your life was the one your own mother refused to attend? This is the true story of Madeline Whitmore, a daughter forgotten, a bride dismissed, and a woman who chose to reclaim everything in a quietest, most powerful way. When her family walked away from her backyard wedding, she lit it anyway. With handmade vows, mismatched chairs, and a love that didn't need an audience. But what came next, when the video went viral, was a reckoning no one expected, not even her mother. Stay with us as we unravel a story of rejection, resilience, and quiet revenge. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she just said, "A backyard? That's not a wedding. That's a neighborhood embarrassment." Then she hung up. Madeline sat on the porch steps long after the call ended, the wood cold and grooved beneath her palms, the air sharp with November wind. She didn't cry. She didn't scream either. There was no point. Her mother had always known how to cut without raising her voice, disapproval delivered in perfect diction. No profanity, no drama, just dismissal. She stared at the phone in her hand, still unlocked, as if willing it to ring again, as if hoping this time Eleanor Whitmore would say she was joking, or misunderstood, or that she had a conflict, but she'd try to make it work. But the screen stayed black. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak from the string lights Malik had started installing across the yard. Malik stepped out onto the porch a few minutes later, a mug of tea in each hand. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside her and passed her the mug. The steam drifted upward, lavender and lemon balm softening the air between them. "She said no," Madeline murmured. He nodded slowly. "Because it's in the backyard." A bitter laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Because it's not a ballroom. No chandeliers, no monogrammed napkins, no valet parking, just us, string lights, and mismatched chairs from Craigslist." Malik didn't argue. He never did when she needed to unravel. He just listened. "It's not about me," she added after a pause. "It never was. It's about what she pictured, and what she pictured didn't have me in it." That realization landed like a quiet fracture. Not painful in the moment, but deep and certain. The kind of break that didn't show until everything else around it started to fall apart. She stood, hugging the mug close to her chest, and looked out over the yard, still half empty. The garden beds were bare save for the wildflower seeds they'd planted 2 weeks ago, hoping for a late bloom. The rented arch still leaned against the fence, unpainted. Her mother hadn't asked about any of it. Not about the hand-wired lanterns, not the vows they were writing, not the fact they were only inviting 25 people because they couldn't afford more and didn't want more. She said, "It's a potluck for hippies," Madeline said, voice thin. Malik looked over, meeting her eyes. And I spent 6 months designing the lighting. I'm making my own dress. We built that damn arch with our own hands. It may not be a palace, but it's ours. She'll never see it," he said gently. "No," Madeline said, finally, "but I will." There was steel beneath her words now, cold clarity. She had been the daughter in the background for so long that she had forgotten what it meant to be the subject of her own story. Behind her, inside the house, Claire's voice floated through the open window. Something about trimming the hem on the dress. Devin was coming over later with camera gear to test lighting for the video. Not for TikTok, not for Instagram. For them. Madeline took a sip of her tea and turned back toward the house. Her mother wouldn't be there on October 8th, that was clear now. But the lights would still glow. The wild flowers would still bloom. Maybe not on time, but defiantly. The backyard would become a sanctuary, a stage, a reckoning. She walked inside, closed the door softly behind her, and picked up the invitation that had come back unopened. Lavender cardstock, silk ribbon, untouched. unseen. Her fingers hovered for a moment, then dropped it into the box of keepsakes by the window, right beside her childhood dance ribbons, the ones her mother never watched her win. The guest list hadn't changed, but the story had. The box of keepsakes stayed open beside the window seat, the returned invitation resting on top like a quiet accusation. Madeline didn't look at it again. She didn't have to. Its presence was enough. Proof of what had been offered and refused. Later that evening, as the sky deepened into bruised purple and the porch lights flickered on one by one, Claire arrived with her sewing kit and a bag of Trader Joe's frozen gyoza. She kissed Madeline on the cheek, took off her boots, and immediately took over the kitchen like she had 100 times before. The sound of a pan hissing and the rhythmic snip of thread quickly filled the small house, steady and comforting. "You okay?" Claire asked, not looking up from the hem she was adjusting. Madeline hesitated. "She's not coming." Claire didn't flinch. "I figured. She said it wasn't a real wedding, just a backyard embarrassment." Claire's hand stilled. She looked up. "And yet, she still thinks she deserves to be in the photos when it goes viral someday." Madeline smiled. "Just barely. Devon's coming tomorrow. Wants to test the lighting setup and maybe get some B-roll before the actual day." "Smart," Claire said. "This is something worth remembering, especially for you." That last sentence hung in the air, heavier than it should have. Madeline didn't answer. She reached into a drawer and pulled out the paper lantern test strips she'd been staining by hand. Coffee-dyed, sun-dried, torn carefully for texture. She laid them across the table, lining them up like a fragile mosaic of light. Her phone buzzed. Rachel. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again. A voicemail. Still, she didn't move. "She'll call back," Claire said gently. "Or not. Either way, your day isn't about them. It's about you." "I used to think I'd be a bridesmaid at Rachel's wedding," Madeline said suddenly, her voice distant. "But I wasn't even in the family photos. I was behind the buffet table, checking if they'd run out of crab cakes." "I remember," Claire said. "You had blisters, those awful clearance flats." Madeline laughed once, dry and low. "And Mom cried over Rachel's train. Like she was watching the coronation of a queen." "She'll regret this one day," Claire said. "I don't need her regrets. I just wanted her presence." Outside, the wind picked up. The fabric of the backyard arch fluttered against the fence. Madeline walked to the window, watching it shift in the golden light. She imagined the ceremony, no aisle, no stage, just grass and gravel and people who chose to be there. No formal photos, no speeches, just truth. She turned back to Claire. "I'm tired of performing." "For a family that never looked at me long enough to remember who I am?" Claire nodded. "Then don't perform. Just live." That night, after Claire left and the house fell quiet, Madeline curled up on the couch beneath the same quilt she'd had since college. She pulled out a leather-bound notebook and began writing her vows. Not the version her mother might have liked, with flowery metaphors and carefully timed pauses, but real ones. Words about building a life out of small things. Words about choosing each other. Over and over, even when no one claps. Words about light. Not the kind that dazzles, but the kind that warms a room quietly. The last sentence she wrote before falling asleep was this: "You were the home I was always told I wasn't worthy of." And as she closed the notebook, she knew, whether or not anyone from the Whitmore family showed up, this wedding would be real, because it was hers. And that, finally, was enough. The sky that morning was not the dramatic kind. No thunderheads or omens, no cinematic storm brewing. It was a gentle gray, the kind that made white roses look like watercolor, and bare branches seem etched in silver. Madeline stood barefoot on the back porch, her arms wrapped around herself, watching the breath of the day rise from the earth like memory. Inside, Claire was steaming the dress she'd finished hemming the night before. Soft cream, cotton, fitted bodice, and hidden pockets. No beating, no corset, no $1,000 train, just cloth and care. Malik was in the kitchen folding napkins by hand. Madeline could hear the low hum of the speaker on the counter playing a playlist they'd made together. Van Morrison, a little Joni, a lot of silence in between. The chairs had been borrowed from neighbors and friends. No two matched, but each had a ribbon tied around the back. Dyed in different shades of blush, rust, sage. The arch was finally up, wrapped in wild grapevines and paper lanterns strung from tree to tree. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't glossy, but it was breathing, alive. The kind of place where something could begin. Madeline stepped down from the porch and slowly walked between the rows, brushing her fingers along the tops of the chairs. Every detail had a reason. The mason jars filled with rosemary, the mismatched china collected from flea markets, the long wood table they had sanded by hand. This wasn't a stage. It was a mirror. She paused beneath the arch and looked out toward where the guests would sit. 25 people. Some cousins and a few co-workers. Mostly friends who had chosen her over years and years of being the quieter one, the one behind the camera, the one with her name forgotten in group texts. Claire appeared in the doorway, holding the dress like an offering. "It's ready." Madeline nodded and followed her. People inside, the bedroom mirror reflected a different woman than the one who had once stood behind a buffet table in clearance flats. This version of herself stood tall. Not radiant, maybe, but solid, a woman who had stopped waiting for permission. Claire helped her zip the back, then pinned 2 gardenias behind her ear. "You okay?" she asked. "I think so," Madeline whispered. "I feel like me." "That's exactly who you should be today." Madeline touched the fabric over her heart, where her vows were folded and tucked into the dress pocket. No one else had read them. Not Malik, not Claire, not even herself in full, really. They'd come together over nights of scribbling and crossing out, half prayers and full truths, until they felt right. Outside, the sounds began to change. Footsteps, murmurs, a car door slamming, Devon's camera clicking in test shots from the edge of the fence line. No wedding planner, no clipboard, just Devon in sneakers and a scarf recording without directing. Madeline took one last look in the mirror, then turned away. There was no bridal march, no formal announcement. The ceremony began the moment she stepped barefoot onto the gravel path and saw Malik standing beneath the arch. His suit was navy, slightly wrinkled, and perfect. He looked at her like he was seeing sunlight for the first time. His hands trembled. So did hers. She took the first step toward him, not thinking about who was missing, but who was here. Not the empty chairs, but the filled ones. Not the silence of rejection, but the sound of bird song and wind in the branches. And with each step forward, she felt something shed. Not pain exactly, but permission. To begin again, on her terms. There was no officiant, no script, just 2 people standing beneath a canopy of vines and lanterns, surrounded by the warm rustle of leaves and the quiet breath of 25 witnesses. Madeline and Malik faced each other, hands trembling, hearts loud beneath their ribs. Devon adjusted her lens, but didn't speak. She understood this wasn't a performance. It was something older, quieter, sacred in a way ceremony books never captured. Malik went first. He pulled a folded page from his jacket pocket, but didn't read it. He held it like a map he no longer needed, then looked at Madeline as if nothing else existed. "I wrote so many versions of this," he said, voice uneven. "Tried to sound poetic, tried to sound wise, but the truth is, I just want to say thank you for not needing me to be perfect, for choosing me when no one else would have blamed you for walking away. You make me feel like I came home. Madeline's eyes stung. He had said that phrase once before, early in their relationship, sitting on a fire escape with a plastic cup of wine between them. She hadn't believed him then. She believed him now. She unfolded her own note, but, like him, didn't look down. Her voice was steadier than she expected. I spent years thinking love was something to earn, something to chase, something that only arrived with sacrifice or silence. But you taught me love doesn't require shrinking. It expands. You made space for me when even my own family couldn't. And today I vow to do the same. No matter the storm, no matter the silence, I stay. She slipped the paper back into her dress pocket. Her fingers lingered there, as if tucking the vow into the skin itself. There was no applause, just breath. Then Malik leaned forward, and they kissed. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't choreographed, it was real, and when they stepped back, the clapping came. Not polite, not staged, but wholehearted and full of joy, from friends who had watched them grow, from coworkers who had seen them stumble, from neighbors who had lent them chairs and recipes and encouragement. Claire wiped her eyes with the corner of a napkin. Dinner came in enamel pots. Pot roast, roasted vegetables, cornbread slathered with honey butter. Malik's cousin played old soul songs on a second-hand speaker. Plates were passed hand to hand, not delivered by servers in white gloves. Someone popped open a bottle of cider with a pocket knife. Someone else started humming. The light began to change. Devon signaled quietly to Madeline and flicked a switch at the base of the fence. One by one, the paper lanterns above lit up, a soft golden glow wrapping the space in something like magic. It was as if the stars had dipped down to witness. Madeline stood in the center of it all, barefoot on the gravel, arms looped around Malik's neck. They swayed, not to a beat, but to the moment itself. Claire leaned over and whispered, "This looks like a film set." Madeline smiled, eyes locked on her husband. "No," she said, "this looks like home." And as the lanterns flickered above them, warm and steady, Madeline knew this was more than a wedding. This was reclamation of light, of space, of self. She danced with her whole being, not for anyone watching, but because she was finally allowed to take up room. The backyard was no longer just the place they lived, it was the place they became. 2 weeks after the wedding, the video arrived in Madeline's inbox like a memory she hadn't yet earned. No subject line. Just a WeTransfer link and a single-line message from Devon. No narration, no edits, just you. She waited until nightfall to open it. The house was quiet, still scented faintly with rosemary and candle wax. Malik had gone to bed early with a book draped across his chest. The porch door cracked to let in the autumn wind. Madeline curled up on the couch in thick socks and her oldest sweater, dimmed the lights, and pressed play. It began with Malik standing beneath the arch, wiping his palms on his pants, then cut to her lacing a ribbon around a jar of wild flowers, her fingers steady, her face unseen. There was no music, only the real sounds, gravel shifting underfoot, chairs creaking, someone's laughter from the back row. The vows came like whispers carried by wind. Malik's voice caught on the word home. Her own voice, when she spoke of staying, cracked like something sacred was breaking open. The final shot held for 7 full seconds, the two of them dancing barefoot beneath the lanterns, the fabric above them, swaying like stars, pretending to be close. Madeline didn't cry right away. She watched it twice, then a third time, then called Malik in. He sat silently beside her as the short film played again, his hand finding hers on instinct. When it ended, he leaned forward, his voice low. She made it feel ancient. Madeline nodded. "Do you think it's petty if I post it?" Malik smiled without irony. Sometimes petty is just the truth finally told. That night, she uploaded the 90-second video with no hashtags, no captions, just 3 words: October 8th, home, love. Then she put her phone on the windowsill and went to bed. By morning, it had over 20,000 views. By lunch, 50. By dinner, she had a message from an indie design blog asking for permission to feature it in their next issue. By sunset, a second one arrived from a wedding-style magazine, more curated, more performative. She declined the second. That evening, as she reheated leftover sweet potatoes, her phone buzzed again, this time a voicemail from Rachel. "Hey. Wow, I saw the video. It's..." A pause. A breath. "It's really beautiful. Why didn't you tell us it was going to be like that?" Madeline stared at the blinking dot on her screen. She didn't press play again. A few minutes later, a text from her aunt arrived. "That wedding video is all over my feed. I didn't even know it was yours." Stunning, a thumbs-up emoji followed. Madeline thumbed over it without responding. Then came the message she had known was coming, from Eleanor. "Is this the wedding I wasn't invited to?" It was a single line, no greeting, no punctuation. Madeline's heart didn't race, she didn't pace, she simply sat down, laid the phone on the table beside her bowl, and stared at the words. Technically, Eleanor had been invited. Embossed cardstock, silk ribbon, lavender scent. She had never RSVP'd. Never responded. The invitation had been returned unopened, dropped through the mail slot like junk. Still, Madeline didn't answer. Not yet. Outside, a neighbor's wind chime stirred. Inside, the glow of the paper lanterns they'd forgotten to take down still blinked in the window's reflection. She picked up her phone again and reread the message. Not hurt, not regret, just image. As always, it was never about her. It was about being seen. Madeline didn't respond to her mother's message that night. She went to bed with the curtains open, letting the moonlight lay soft across the quilt at her feet. The house was quiet, but not still. The kind of quiet that holds a question. By morning, the silence had curdled. A second message waited. "You made us look terrible, Julia. People keep asking why we weren't there. You could have warned us." Madeline sat on the edge of the bed, rereading the words, this time slower. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "I wish I'd come," just, "You could have warned us." Warned them? Warned them about what? That love without chandeliers still counted? That handmade vows and mismatched chairs and rosemary centerpieces had turned into something beautiful despite their absence? She got up, made coffee, fed the cat that had adopted them last winter, and said nothing to Mali. By noon, her stomach was tight with unsaid things. Not anger, exactly, not grief, something knottier, something that sat in her throat like a spoon she couldn't swallow. That afternoon, Malik came home from work early. He kissed her on the forehead and settled beside her on the couch, where the laptop was still open, to the comments section of the video. "She texted again?" he asked gently. Madeline nodded. "This time she's upset I didn't make it look worse." He tilted his head. "It wasn't about her. That's why it worked." "I know," she hesitated. "But she really doesn't." They sat in silence, the kind that isn't awkward but shared, like a coat held open between two people. After a while, Malik said, "Let her see it." Madeline turned to him, startled. "Why, not because she deserves to," he said. "Because she clearly doesn't understand what she missed." Madeline looked down at her hands. They were calloused from weeks of hot glue, gardening, rewiring string lights. She traced the curve of her palm, then nodded. The message she composed was short. "If you want to understand what actually happened, come to Devon's studio on Friday at 3. We'll play the full footage, no edits." She stared at it for a full minute before pressing send. The reply came 2 hours later. "Fine." Friday arrived gray again, not cold, just hesitant. Eleanor arrived 10 minutes late, dressed in pearls and a cashmere coat, like she was attending a charity luncheon. not a reckoning. She stepped into the studio lobby without looking around, her posture immaculate. No hug, no smile, just a nod. Devon had set up the screening room for two. No commentary, no music, just real sound projected onto a modest screen. Chairs side by side, a soft hum in the air like a held breath. Madeline didn't speak. She hit play. For the first 5 minutes, Eleanor sat stiffly, arms crossed, face unreadable. Madeline didn't watch the film. She watched her mother. Watched the micro shifts, the blink at the vowels, the twitch at Malik's stammer. Her shoulders dipped slightly at the scene of dancing under the lights like something was being loosened against her will. When the film ended, Madeline didn't move. The screen froze on an image of empty chairs and candle stubs. Eleanor finally exhaled, sharp and quiet. "It looked expensive," she murmured. Madeline turned to her, steady. "Would it have mattered?" Eleanor glanced away. "You didn't say it would be like that. I wasn't auditioning for your approval," Madeline said. "I was getting married. You made us look like we didn't care." Madeline didn't blink. "Did you?" The silence that followed was longer than any apology. Madeline didn't expect her mother to return to her seat. Eleanor had stood after the final frame, half turned toward the door, coat folded neatly over her arm. The silence stretched between them like a long hallway, but instead of walking out, she paused. Then slowly, almost without thought, she sat back down. Just for a moment. Just long enough to prove something to herself. Or maybe to undo something she didn't yet know how to name. "I didn't know it would be beautiful," she said, voice clipped but quieter than usual. Madeline stared ahead at the dim screen, where the still image of the backyard remained. Candle wax pooled, petals scattered, chairs just slightly askew, the aftermath of something real. "That's the point," Madeline replied. "You didn't care to find out." Eleanor said nothing. The light caught the edge of her pearl earring as she turned slightly, as if considering a rebuttal, but none came. Instead, she gathered her bag and stood. Madeline didn't move. She wasn't going to walk her out. This wasn't a reconciliation. This wasn't a door reopening. It was a line in sand, already hardened to stone. The door clicked shut behind her with an elegance Madeline had come to expect. She stared at it for several seconds longer, then finally rose and crossed the small studio floor to where Devon stood silently in the projection booth, hands resting on the console. "She watched the whole thing?" Devon asked. Madeline nodded. "Did she say anything?" "She said it looked expensive." Devon snorted softly. "I guess that's one way to say I missed everything that mattered." Madeline managed a smile, faint and crooked. "It's her native tongue. Translation: I almost cared." They left the studio together and stepped out into the soft gray of early evening. Portland smelled like rain and dry leaves, the kind of air that made you want to begin again. Madeline drove home in silence, letting the sound of the tires over wet asphalt lull her into something close to calm. When she pulled into the driveway, the house was lit softly, porch light on, one window glowing amber. She found Malik on the couch, a book in his lap, tea forgotten beside him. "How'd it go?" he asked gently. "She stayed till the end," Madeline said, towing off her boots. "That something?" She said it looked expensive. He raised an eyebrow. "And?" "And I told her I wasn't asking for her approval." Madeline paused, brushing hair from her face. "She didn't deny it." They sat in silence for a while. Not the kind that pressed down, but the kind that settled like dust over something newly cleaned. A space cleared. Later, as Madeline prepared for bed, she opened the bottom drawer of her nightstand and pulled out the lavender wedding invitation Eleanor had returned unopened months ago. She held it a moment, then slid it back into its envelope, sealed it again, and placed it gently on top of the dresser. She wouldn't mail it again, but it belonged out in the light now. Not because it held hope, but because it no longer held weight. Upstairs, Malik turned off the lamp. Downstairs, The last paper lantern in the backyard still glowed through the kitchen window. One small, defiant light. She left it on. Thanksgiving came and went without a word. There were no invitations, no last-minute calls, no mass emails about who was bringing what dish. Madeline watched as her relatives posted smiling group photos online. Rachel in a cranberry sweater, Eleanor in her signature cream blouse. Everyone gathered around a table that once belonged to Madeline's grandmother. In one shot, the camera had captured the sideboard where the family china was always kept, including the blue and white set Madeline once believed she'd inherit. She didn't feel anger, just an ache, the kind that comes not from the cut, but from the confirmation. No one had said the words. No one had officially disowned her. They had simply omitted her. She made roasted chicken that day with Malik, peeled carrots from their small backyard garden, set the table with their mismatched plates, and poured cider into the jelly jars they'd use at the wedding. They played records, talked about nothing in particular, laughed. And when they raised a toast, it was to Light. Quiet, stubborn, resilient. That night, as Malik slept, Madeline scrolled through the wedding film one more time, the full version this time. 12 minutes long, Devon's rough cut for the gallery show. She paused on the frame where Claire lit the candles before the ceremony began. Her hand was steady, her eyes soft, a friend holding space. There was no sound on the paused screen, but Madeline could hear it anyway. The hush before vows, the clink of forks against enamel, the scrape of chairs against gravel. A kind of intimacy no curated photo album could replicate. She closed the laptop slowly and stared out the window. The lanterns were still strung between the trees, now dusted with early frost. One bulb flickered faintly like a heartbeat. She thought about taking them down before snow came, but something held her back. Maybe they belonged to the season now, or maybe they were part of the home this place had become. The following week, Devon called. The gallery in Seattle said yes, she said, barely containing her excitement. They want to include the film in the December show. Opening night's the 12th. You and Malik are invited, obviously. Madeline blinked. Wait. Really? I thought they only did conceptual pieces. They do, Devon said. They're calling it intimate architecture, about how we build memory inside spaces, how private becomes public. Your film, it's the anchor. They said it made people cry. Madeline didn't answer right away. She stood in the middle of her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, Malik's scarf still looped around her neck from his morning goodbye. She turned slowly, looking at the space that had once felt like a compromise and now felt like a declaration. I'm in, she said softly. We're in. That night she lit every lantern in the yard. Not for guests, not for cameras. For herself. She stood beneath them, barefoot in the cold. Head tilted to the sky, arms folded against the chill. Somewhere behind her, Malik called out to ask if she wanted tea. She nodded without turning around, eyes fixed on the lights above her. They didn't shimmer like stars, they weren't grand, but they stayed, and that, she thought, was more than enough. No one said the words, no one needed to. There was no confrontation, no screaming phone call, no dramatic message declaring she'd been cut off. But when Christmas came and the mailbox remained empty, when Rachel posted a photo of the whole family around the piano captioned "Tradition is everything," Madeline understood. She had not been erased loudly. She had been omitted, quietly. That, somehow, was worse. She sat by the window that morning with a cup of ginger tea cooling in her hands, staring out at the frost-laced garden. The rosemary still held on, stubborn and green beneath the cold. A wind chime in the neighbor's yard rang gently, soft and strange, out of rhythm with the stillness. She wasn't sad, not in the way she once feared. This was not heartbreak. It was clarity. And clarity had a stillness to it, a precision. Malik walked in with 2 mugs and the Sunday paper, setting them down without a word. He looked at her the way someone looks at a person returning from a long, hard journey. She gave him a small smile. "Not even a text," she said. "I'm not surprised," he replied. She paused. "I used to think if I could just be impressive enough, quiet enough, perfect enough, they'd want me back." Malik leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And now?" "I don't want back in," she said simply. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of resolution. Later that week, she received a padded envelope from Devon. Inside was the final press kit for the Seattle Gallery show. Her name was listed in the center of the artist sheet. Madeline Whitmore, light as language, the wedding reclaimed. The write-up beneath described the piece as an unfiltered testament to self-degradation inside domesticity. The phrase made her laugh. She clipped the page to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pear. They flew up to Seattle the following weekend. The gallery was minimalist. High ceilings, polished concrete, white walls that hummed faintly under the winter light. Their film played on a continuous loop in a corner alcove, projected softly against fabric instead of a screen. Devon stood nearby, fielding quiet compliments and the occasional confused question from first-time patrons. Madeline stood behind a group of older women as they watched the film in silence. One of them dabbed her eye with a tissue. Another whispered, "I don't even know them, and I feel like I was there." She turned to Malik, who was sipping mulled wine from a paper cup. "They're crying," she whispered. He nodded, warm and sure. Because it was real. She exhaled slowly. In that moment, surrounded by strangers who somehow saw her clearer than her own blood ever had, she realized something, both small and enormous. She had stopped needing permission to exist. Later that night, back in their hotel room overlooking Puget Sound, she unpacked the ribbon she'd used to tie her vows and laid it on the desk like a relic. She didn't need to reread them. She remembered every word, not because they were perfect, but because they had been chosen, intentionally, stubbornly, by someone finally ready to speak. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Not another vow. Not a letter to anyone. Just a beginning. Because this time, there was nothing left to prove. A week after the gallery opening, the package arrived. There was no return address, no note on the outside, just Madeline's name written in the kind of cursive that belonged to another decade. The letters curled tightly, like they had been holding their breath for a long time. She found it on the porch when she came home from the grocery store, nestled beside the rosemary plant in its winter pot. The box was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, carefully sealed. She hesitated before picking it up, instinctively knowing this wasn't something she'd ordered or anything Malik had arranged. Back inside, she placed it on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a while. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. A slant of afternoon light fell across the counter, catching on the edge of the torn paper where the return label should have been, but wasn't. Madeline made tea. She waited until the kettle whistled, until the cup was full, warm in her hand. Then she carefully opened the box. Inside was a single photograph. It was from Rachel's wedding, one Madeline had never seen. She was in it, barely, captured mid-mashing at the edge of the frame, holding a silver tray of champagne flutes. Her face was turned slightly, her expression unreadable. The lighting was soft, golden. Blurred laughter surrounded her, just out of reach. On the back of the photo, in the same familiar script, were 7 words. "I looked right past you that day." Beneath it, a second line, written smaller. "I see you now." No name, no signature. But Madeline didn't need one. She stood there for a long time, fingers gripping the edge of the counter. Her breath came slow, deliberate. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she simply existed in the moment, suspended between memory and meaning. She didn't frame the photo, didn't send a reply, didn't text Rachel to ask if it had come from her. She didn't need confirmation. The gesture wasn't apology. It was recognition. And recognition, in the end, had never been the problem. It was the delay that had done the damage. That night, after Malik fell asleep with a book still resting on his chest, Madeline pulled out their wedding album. She turned the thick pages slowly, pausing at the one with the wide shot of the backyard, lit up like a lantern grove. There she was, barefoot, laughing, spinning in a circle under the paper moons. Malik's arms open toward her, the whole scene glowing. She slid the photo from Rachel's wedding into the sleeve at the back, tucking it behind that moment, behind the light, the joy, the proof of a life she'd built with no blueprint but love. And then she closed the album. When she turned off the light, the room was still. Outside, a single lantern remained on the porch, one they'd forgotten to take down. It swayed gently in the wind, casting shadows against the siding, a soft glow, unbothered by who saw it. In the dark, Madeline whispered words no one had ever said to her when she was small, but that now came freely, quietly, and completely her own. You were never invisible. You were just waiting to be seen by the right eyes. She fell asleep with the window cracked open, the night air curling in like a second breath. She didn't dream about her mother. She didn't need to. Winter in Portland didn't arrive like a declaration. It seeped in slowly, like water through wood. The days shrank quietly. The air grew dense with stillness. And Madeline found herself drawn more and more to the softest corners of the house. The reading nook by the window, the quilt-covered chair in the bedroom, the sunless side of the garden that somehow still held on to life. She hadn't heard from Eleanor since the package, not that she expected to. Recognition had never been her mother's language. It had taken the form of silence, detachment, strategic omissions, and now that silence felt settled. Not peaceful, but known. She spent her mornings working on a new light installation, a series of hand-blown glass bulbs filled with fragments of dried herbs, pressed flowers, curled strips of her wedding vows. It wasn't for a show, not yet. It was something else, a meditation, a translation of things she had words for. One gray morning, while reorganizing a drawer she hadn't opened in years, she found an old cassette recorder tucked beneath a stack of notebooks. The tape inside was unmarked, and the machine barely held charge, but curiosity tugged her thumb against the play button. Static. Then a voice. Tiny, high-pitched, her own. "This is Madeline, and I'm 6. I made a house out of paper, and I think it's strong enough to live in." Laughter, Rachel's probably. Then another voice, faint and rare. Eleanor's. Not scolding, not controlling, just amused. A memory she didn't recall, preserved by accident. Madeline sat there on the floor of her studio, back against the cabinets, listening as her childhood self chattered about nothing. The sound was grainy, but it pulsed with something alive. A version of her that had once believed she could build homes from paper, that thought people stayed because they loved you. She pressed stop gently. No tears, just a breath. Later that week, a letter arrived from the gallery in Seattle. They were preparing a printed catalog of the intimate architecture exhibit and wanted to include a short artist statement from her. Something personal, something reflective. She stared at the request for a long time. Then, with the same slow certainty she had used the night she wrote her vows, she sat down and began to type. This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about returning first to a house, then to a moment, and finally to myself. She didn't try to be profound. She didn't lace the paragraph with poetry. She wrote plainly. About light. About choosing what stays lit. About how the things we build for ourselves, no matter how small or improvised, can outlast even the most careful erasure. She signed it simply. Madeline Whitmore, Portland, Oregon. The next morning, as she stepped out onto the porch with her tea, she saw the frost-covered lantern swaying gently untouched since fall. One had fallen, its paper crushed. She picked it up carefully, fingers red from cold, and brought it inside. She didn't fix it. She placed it on the windowsill, broken, side-facing out. A quiet emblem. Not everything had to be repaired to be worth keeping. Not everything needed to be whole to hold light. The afternoon sun melted through the cloud cover just enough to give the room a honey-colored glow. Madeline was sorting through the bottom drawer of the sideboard looking for extra stamps when her fingers brushed against the edge of a photo sleeve. She pulled it out, gently, confused. She didn't remember putting anything there recently. Inside was a single image, Malik spinning her under the paper lanterns, her head thrown back in laughter, one bare foot just lifting off the ground. The glow from the lights crowned them in soft gold. It was her favorite moment from the wedding, though she hadn't seen it from this angle before. Devon must have printed it, or maybe Claire. There was no note, no frame. Just the moment itself. She slipped it into the back of their wedding album, behind the handwritten vows and the fig cake recipe she'd scrawled on the back of a napkin. Then she paused, reached deeper into the drawer, and pulled out the photograph from Rachel's wedding. The one that had come without a return address, with the words etched on the back like a belated confession. I looked right past you that day. I see you now. She held both images side by side. One captured her in the margins, barely visible, holding a tray. The other showed her, in motion, seen fully, unafraid. It wasn't a transformation, it was a reclamation. Two versions of the same girl, one forgotten, one remembered. She slid them both into the same page protector, back to back. Not to compare, to acknowledge. There were no new texts from Eleanor. No follow-up apologies, no olive branches disguised as invitations, just a quiet stretch of winter days that passed without event or rupture. Madeline found comfort in their rhythm. The gallery show was winding down, and Devon mentioned that a university in Vermont had requested permission to use the wedding film in a seminar on memory and spatial identity. She said yes without hesitation. Weeks later, as spring began its slow, reluctant return, Madeline stood in the garden, kneeling beside the wildflower patch. Tiny green shoots poked through the soil, stubborn, unpredictable. She pressed her palm against the dirt and smiled. They had bloomed late, but they had bloomed. That evening, a letter arrived, not from her mother, but from a woman named June Harris, a retired wedding planner who had seen the video online and written in looping cursive, "I've been in this business for 42 years. Yours was the first wedding that made me cry. Not because it was perfect, because it was brave." Madeline read it aloud to Malik as they sat on the porch, sipping tea as the last light left the sky. "Brave," she repeated, quietly. Malik smiled. "She's right, you know." Madeline didn't answer. She looked out at the backyard. Still bare in places, still uneven, but undeniably theirs. The lights above had been rewired since fall. They were stronger now, more permanent, not just decoration, foundation. And as the sky darkened and the first star appeared above the trees, Madeline whispered the words she would say if ever someone asked her how it all happened, how she found her way through the silence, the omission, the ache. We planted wildflowers where they expected roses. We served food from our hands, not a caterer's checklist. We danced on gravel and called it sacred. We invited everyone who mattered, even the ones who didn't show up. And in the end, we weren't missing anything, because what stays is what matters. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. This wasn't just a story about a wedding, it was a story about memory, about being left out, being overlooked, and choosing, finally, to stop asking for a seat at a table that never made room. To those who've ever felt invisible in their own family, who've been told their love was too quiet, too small, too strange, this was for you. We don't all get the apology. We don't all get the closure. Sometimes we get silence. Sometimes we get a photo with no signature, and sometimes that has to be enough. But what we do get to choose is how we show up for ourselves, how we build light where there was none, how we tell the truth not with volume, but with consistency, intention, and care. If no one ever told you this, you are not too much, you are not too little, you were never the problem. You were just waiting to be seen by the right eyes. So whether your celebration is loud or quiet, public or private, filled with guests or held in solitude, may you know this: you are allowed to build joy that doesn't need permission. You are allowed to reclaim your story, and when they ask what made it so beautiful, you can tell them, it was real, it was mine, and that was enough. Thank you for watching, and may your light always find a way to stay on.